couple of these real fast. One that I think is very key is we need a Truth in Bonding Act. There's a controversy up north right now over the bonding for the museum. We ran a pretty big bond issue through Iron County just a couple of years ago for the pool complex across the street. What a Truth in Bonding Act would do is require a bond on your ballot to give you the same information about the actual payoff of the bond that you get when you buy a house or a car, to tell you how it's actually going to cost if you pay it out over the entire term of the bond, not just the amount that you're borrowing, because those are two very, very different things. A few other bills real fast. That is SB 16, which is Fourth Amendment violation. 272 is the Utah Transit Authority investing in real estate. That's crazy. Then there's also some state agencies that have made donations to campaigns with involuntary tax that's collected, and you've got to stop that.
Can I request just 30 seconds to address a couple of issues? Just two issues were brought up, and I just felt like I need to address them because I've been voting both of those bills. SB 81 was a bill that was sponsored by Loud Hilliard. There was some amendments to the eminent domain section of the code. It was an update. What it did was allow the parties to get together a little quicker and make a settlement if possible. The eminent domain comes to the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, but we need to point out that that bill, if it's so controversial, it received a 5-0 vote in the committee, 27-0 vote in the Senate, and a 69-0 vote in the House. House Bill 150 is the one you mentioned by Brad Daw. That was one that was brought forward by the Attorney General in trying to get access to online accounts, actually going for on internet crime. Just quickly, I had a real good mentor tell me one time, never be afraid to say you have made a mistake. Well, I'm not saying that I made a mistake on this bill, but I will point out that Representative Daw is working to correct some of the provisions that went through in that bill. Sorry.
Okay. Gentlemen, let's talk about the 10th Amendment, specifically the 10th Amendment in the context of use of public lands, prairie dog issues, and anything else that fits the will of the federal government against those of state legislators or even local leaders. And Evan, I believe you have the first crack at this one.
Okay. Thanks. One of the most frustrating things that I've dealt with in my life, in my political life, is the issue you just mentioned. Public land use, the proper use of our public lands, the prairie dog issue. We've passed a number of states' rights bills that directly tie back to the 10th Amendment, primarily sponsored by the Patrick Henry Caucus, Representative Weber, Representative Parrott, Assumption, and Sandstrom, that brought those forward that specifically address certain types of things where the states, we're trying to send a message to the federal government, look, leave us alone. Let us take care of the things that we can take care of. I can't even begin to tell you how frustrating the prairie dog issue is. The prairie dog issue goes back to federal domain, not allowing proper counts. Everybody in the audience, I'm sure, understands this. But the bottom line is it's a very frustrating thing. Now, with that, Senator Stoll is working on a bill, and I'm assisting him on that in trying to establish the fact that the prairie dog, the state should have eminent domain on prairie dog, because it only exists in about 4 or 5 counties inside the state, not across state boundaries. We're working on it. Now, will we be successful in that? I don't know. The odds are against us, but it's something that we're trying. Public lands, my belief is that we should be able to use those public lands for the best use of our citizens. Right now, that's one of the big reasons that we're struggling with education funding, because 70% of our land is owned by the federal government. Should we have access to those mineral rights? Should we have access to the drilling? Yes, we should. Should we have access to the coal? Yes, we should. Now, should there be guidelines and provisions that allow us to do that? Yes, but they shouldn't be so restricted that it doesn't allow it to happen. That's what's going on.
Once again, we're probably not very far apart on this particular issue, because there's just it's the management or the mismanagement by the federal government of so much of this land is just again sort of insane. We are unfortunately at a very serious disadvantage that was put upon us in 1895 when the Utah Constitution was passed. I don't know if you've ever read the Utah Constitution. This is an excerpt from Article 3. Second, the people inhabiting this state do affirm and declare that they were ever to disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundaries hereof, and to all lands lying within said limits, owned or held by any Indian or Indian tribes, and that until the title thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States, the same shall be and remain subject to the disposition of the United States. Control, and said Indian land shall remain under the absolute jurisdiction and control of the Congress of the United States. That puts us at a serious legal disadvantage, as Evan indicated. We're going to have a tough time in court on a lot of this. So we need people who can, sit down and talk the language and hopefully work some things out. I certainly am not opposed to using the 10th Amendment where we can, but it's going to be difficult and it's going to be a long struggle. And we're going to have a discussion at some point about exactly how much money we're willing to spend on that struggle, because it could be a very expensive fight.
Just to add to that, he's absolutely right as far as the cost, and you have to pick your fights on those. Be careful to pick your fights, because some you just can't win. And some for example, the Margaret Dane's gun bill this year, we were able to team up with some of the other states to tag on to that, be less costly, still try to get that done.
Okay. I'm going to follow up on that question and dig just a little bit deeper. Barry, we're going to start with you. Two questions. Whose powers are limited by the 10th Amendment, and can you think of any ways to improve enforcement of the 10th Amendment?
The federal government's powers are obviously limited by the 10th Amendment. That's just not even a question, except perhaps in some federal courts. Any ways to, it's going to be a long, drawn-out court battle. It's going to take a lot of people. It's not going to work if Utah goes off and tries to do something and no other states join with us. We're going to need some allies to get anywhere with any of this stuff. I wish I could offer some sort of simple solution, but frankly, the only solution is we're going to have to fight if we're going to make any progress with this.
I agree as far as whose powers are limited. It's Congress. They're told that there's only certain things they can do. The state should have the opportunity to do those things. And I think most of us, especially I'm sure most of the people in this room, are going to be in favor of a local control. You're starting to bottom up and top down. And the issue as far as how do you limit that? How do you get that back to that? The difficulty is that right now there's so many people in this country that believe the Constitution is a living document. Well, that sounds great. Especially if you don't want to get close to that, because what do you say? Well, I'm for a dead document. That's not the case. But I think that what we need to do, instead of trying to interpret this to what we want, we need to look at what the meaning of the words were when it was written, what exactly the founders meant when they wrote that, and then interpret it that way. And I think if you did it that way, you would find some of these erroneous court decisions that come about to be vastly different than doing that. So that's another frustration. It will be long court battles, but the good thing about it is we're not the only state that are on point on this. And so there are other states that are just as fired up as we are. So there will be a conglomerate that comes together to bring some of those issues to the forefront. And there's going to have to be some changes in Congress. Hopefully Tuesday night will be a beginning.
Is there any rebuttal you wish to make? All right. Next question, and Evan, will begin with you. What legislative committees and or caucuses do you feel that you would be most effective serving on? How would you work to be assigned to those committees that would most affect our area?
It's an interesting thing to learn how the legislature works. Most of the work is done in committee. Most of the difficult work is really done in committee. You think that there's floor fights, and there are floor fights, but most of the work is done in committee. It's been my privilege to serve on the Higher Ed Appropriations Committee, which with SU and our boundaries, that's been very positive. I served on the Revenue and Taxation Committee with a business background. I felt like that was a good area. Health and Human Services because of my professional background. And the speaker was really good to me. He's been, especially being a freshman going in, he was good to assign me to those committees. Now, as I've been there a couple of years, we look at some others that I'd like to be part of. Capital facilities, capital appropriations. We have some buildings in our area resources is a good area, it's one that represents our area, but we've already got good representation from real positive people, Mike Noel, Dennis Stoltz, and others who sit on those that know a lot more about it than I do. So I'd probably be better served to stay with some of the areas that I'm better at from my professional background, my political background experience. Now, and also caucuses, you don't realize how important caucuses are. For example, the rural caucus, there's about 18 or 19 of us that designate ourselves as representing rural values in rural areas. And that's been a very good caucus to be part of, a conservative caucus, a caucus that, we get together and we talk about legislation that's coming up, we talk about tax legislation, efforts that are going on. Those are some of the things, of course, the Republican caucus is a major caucus, but those are areas, so the committees and the caucuses really make a big deal, make a big difference, and that's where a lot of the work is done. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, as a member of a small party, I probably won't get to pick what committees I get to be on. I suspect I'll be looking for table scraps, but that's okay. But let me tell you where I'd like to be, and I certainly would let the necessary people know where I'd like to be. First of all, the Ethics Committee, because we really need to clean up the ethical profile of the legislature. Whether, there isn't even an effort to make it look ethical half the time, so we need to work on that. The Business and Labor Committee, like Eb and I have a small business background. I've been a retail business owner. I've been, I've had employees. I've done all of this stuff. I know how all of that works. So the Business and Labor Committee makes sense. An area that's of interest to me from a libertarian standpoint is the Occupational and Professional Licensing Review Committee, because I believe there are some areas of licensing that are being done in this state that amount to be an unnecessary function of government, things that should be handled by the private sector, not by government at all. So I'd like to be on that committee. Another one where I think I could add a great deal in this particular coming session is the Political Subdivisions Committee, because they're going to be dealing with redistricting. And as a person who is not a member of either of the two major parties, I could actually be a voice for saying, how about if we just try to balance some of these districts instead of trying to tilt them one way or another?
Devin, you have a minute if you'd like to use that.